Today I want to talk about why I am the emotional incest king, why I am your expert, why I am here to help you. Stay tuned. The reason I'm saying I'm an expert in emotional incest is because I know a lot about it and I'm a licensed therapist. So I might as well talk about it and hopefully help some people out there who are dealing with it in their lives, either currently or they're now a grown adult and they're looking back and they're seeing the emotional pain it's caused in their life. That's my status now, is looking back on my life. I've worked through a lot of the emotional pain because I've been in therapy for a good chunk of my life. But if some of you are seeing this and you don't want to go to therapy, or you're too frightened to go to therapy perhaps and really deal with all of this, then at least this video maybe will help you and you'll have some insight about what you went through or are going through, and that it's not your fault. It stems from very dysfunctional parents. So let me tell you a little bit about my parents' background to give you some insight about how emotional incest can begin to gel and take place in a family situation in a home. For me, it started with a very powerful, aggressive mother who was very ambitious and wanted a career back when a lot of women didn't have careers. So she had that energy, she had that drive about her. She was ambitious and friendly and outgoing and extroverted and very determined in her life. And that's the energy she brought into her marriage. Now it's interesting, the marital pick she made back when she got married, she purposely, I think on some level, chose a man who she viewed as weaker than herself. Somebody she could control, somebody who was a bit more malleable than her, somebody who was more meek. And the reason that this is important to know is because for her to be married, she, without realizing it, I think on a conscious level, was going to be the dominant force. So it's interesting how we pick our mates, right, in life. That's how we all do it. You have to be aware of the dance you're doing with your significant other who you may want to settle with, spend your life with, because if you're not aware of it, you can make mistakes like how my mom and dad did, because you're not aware of the pattern. So I think without her really knowing it, she purposely chose a man who she viewed as emotionally weak because she wanted to rule the roost, and that's what she did. My dad, on the other hand, was kind of a simple guy, sort of mellow, a lot meeker in life, not really ambitious, so he brought that energy to the marriage. Both of my parents, by the way, were really good people. They were honest, they were ethical, they were hard workers in their life. They get married, they have 3 children. I'm the youngest of the 3. They have a very poor marriage, a very unhappy, very miserable lives in many ways. By the time I'm born, the marriage had really gone to hell, and both parents, especially my mom, had given up in the marriage, had just thought this is just the way it is. We're Catholic and we're not supposed to get divorced. And generationally, that's what was common back then, is that when you got married, you just stayed married, you just endured it. Even though you had a miserable marriage, even though my parents slept in different bedrooms, even though they had different cars and different friends and completely different lives because they really didn't like each other very much, they still were determined to stay married because that's just what you did, which again is very sad. And I should do a video just about that, because what a sad way to live one's life and watch one's life just kind of go down the toilet by accepting what you don't like. So with the marriage getting so bad, I think unconsciously my mom decided, to heck with my dad, this is done and over, we're going to have completely separate lives. But guess what? I have a young son that's just been born, and I'm going to turn him into my mini husband. He's going to be there to hear all my adult problems. He's going to support me. I'm going to take him everywhere the way I would take a husband or take one of my girlfriends. I'm going to just bring my youngest son, me, with me everywhere and turn him into a companion. Well, that's not a healthy way to grow a child, because it screws up the child emotionally, and I paid a huge price for that, because what happens is the child doesn't get to develop properly emotionally and also develop their own identity development in a timely manner, because it's thwarted by all the emotional smothering from the parent. Now, I've done a few videos on emotional incest, and you can click above for one of the links if you want to understand it more deeply. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it now, other than just telling my story. But if you want to know more broadly about it, just go ahead and click on the link and you can understand a bit more about it and how it's a lot more prevalent than people are willing to admit or talk about. So once my mom chose me as her little mini husband, well, I was doomed because I'm just a little boy and I'm growing up and I'm very young and I don't know any different. I don't know how to compare this to anything. So I just loved being the king of everything, right? Because you're sort of honored like a king. But there's a big payoff for being the king. And then the payoff is that you don't get to really be your authentic self because you have to be the mirror of your, in this case, my mother's eyes. I had to mirror back to her what she wanted to see. Well, in doing the mirroring, it denies me my existence. So for me, it was extremely confusing because number one, I'm going to Catholic school, which is very rigid and very black and white, and I had no one to talk to. Also, my home life was full of tension and stress because on some level, I knew I couldn't be myself. I couldn't be authentic to my mother. My dad didn't step in to rescue me, and I think I still have some buried feelings about him not rising to the occasion to save me from a mother like this. That's what happens in healthy marriages, is if one parent is doing like my mother is doing. By the way, this can happen from a father to a son or daughter or a mother to a son or daughter. But the goal in a healthy marriage is that the other parent comes in and saves the child from a parent who is doing something perhaps emotionally destructive to that child. Well, my dad didn't. His idea of doing anything was sitting on a chair and reading the newspaper and watching the Cleveland Indians play baseball in the summer or watching the Cleveland Browns play football in the winter. I mean, that's the extent of it for him. As I mentioned, he was a very simple man. And plus, he didn't know how to stand up to a woman like my mother. He probably willingly entered the marriage as well because he wanted a woman who was going to lead him like a little puppy dog, right? Because men that are like that, they want somebody in charge who's probably going to take direct action, tell them what to do, sort of plan their life in many ways because it gets them off the hook. Well, it sets the table for a very unhealthy dynamic if that's really what's going on. So I grew up with so many emotional problems. Number one, I couldn't be authentic with anybody because I couldn't be authentic with myself. If you're not being authentic with yourself, you don't know how to be that way with other people. So that made me want to hide. And in the hiding, you develop shame, very shame-based behavior because anything real, you have to circumvent everybody else and do what you want to do real by yourself. So you don't get that you can just be open and honest about who you are. So an enormous amount of shame, an enormous amount of guilt for just existing because you have to realize I didn't think on some level I should be existing because I knew I was playing a facade. I knew I wasn't really being valued for myself. The love I got from my mother was very conditional. So you're being loved, yes. That's what the people are seeing on the outside. All the neighbors, all the friends are thinking, oh God, what a wonderful mother. But they're not understanding that the love is built on a condition. That's only really known between the child and the parent. So I have guilt for just having my own needs, my own wants, my desires, didn't know what to do with it. The hiding also then led me to be terrified to be in front of other people. God forbid I had to give a speech at school. God forbid I had to be the center of attention because I wasn't used to being the center of attention because I knew my role at home was just to be the one who's going to be the people pleaser, the one who's going to support my mother. That was my role, and that was made very clear to me as a very young boy. Because if I tried to rebel against that, she would withdraw her love. She would let it be known both verbally and non-verbally that that was not something she wanted. And as a little 3, 4, 5-year-old boy, you're going to give into that because you need a parent's love. In fact, most children believe on some level they're going to die if they don't get their parents' love because the parents are providing all the basic needs, right? The roof over their head, the food, their clothing. And when you're 2, 3, 4, 5, you don't know how to question that. So you need your parents' love. And if you feel that that's going to be threatened somehow or you're causing it to be threatened, you're going to give in right away because you don't want to mess with that. Now, on top of everything, I'm dealing with the fact that I'm understanding I'm gay, probably in junior high school years, not knowing how to put that into words, certainly, again, not having anybody to talk to about it, definitely not at home, but going to a Catholic school, it was not something I was going to bring up there. And then guess what? I go to a Catholic high school, and that's something I'm not going to bring up there either. So I have deep feelings of shame about my sexual identity, about sex in general, about my body in general, about how I behave, how I carry myself. Because what happens when you're in a mode of hiding everything and you're full of shame and you're full of guilt and you just want to crawl into a little corner like this and sort of disappear, is that you take it all in. I kept all this inside of me because there was nowhere to go. But what I did do was run to my head. So my defense mechanism became not acting out, not taking drugs or running away from home or drinking or something like that. I basically just ran to my head and ruminated. So I paid a price, a big price, in terms of going to my head and with racing thoughts, obsessive thoughts, OCD-ish kind of behaviors to some degree too, because with the OCD-ish kind of behaviors, I knew I could control or wanted to control certain things in my life because I felt no control in my home life or with myself. Plus, I didn't even know myself. So at least I could control some external things possibly. I remember, for example, mowing the lawn. We had a riding lawnmower, and I remember I had to keep the lines as I'm mowing the lawn just perfect, because you can look back and see the lines, especially if the lawn was wet, and it would bug me. It would just tear me up if I sort of veered and didn't make everything rigidly straight. Where there again, OCD-ish, trying to control things, trying to compensate on some level for all the inner chaos by making the external chaos less, trying to control your surroundings. Another thing I did was we had a staircase which went upstairs to the attic / upper bedroom area, and we could set things on that staircase going up there, maybe some books, maybe some pieces of clothing, some gloves or something if it was wintertime. But I would have to check that several times a day and make sure everything is lined up and rigid on that staircase. And if it wasn't, I'd take those books and shuffle them and get them all perfectly together and then set them there. So I had the OCD-ish traits going on. Again, this is a result of the internal chaos and all the chaos at home, because there's a ton of tension at home, because not only do you have the bad marriage going on, but you have my 2 older siblings who resented me on many levels, especially my oldest brother, because he was in the middle. My sister was a bit older and she didn't pay too much attention because she was up and out of the house when I was still quite young. But my older brother, who was just 3 years older than me, had to witness me being the recipient of all this glorified fake love. And what's a kid like that going to feel? Well, of course they're going to be pissed off. Of course they're going to be angry, not only at the parent, probably unconsciously for doing what they're doing, but also they're going to really hate that child, their brother or sister, who's getting all that extra love. Like, why are you so special and I'm not? And to me, that's very reasonable. Why wouldn't a kid feel that way? So that's part of the destruction that emotional incest does, is that it affects the relationships with the siblings. And it definitely affected the relationships with mine. And I've never really had good relationships with my brother or sister, particularly with my brother in terms of the emotional incest, because I was the chosen child, even though I didn't want it. I didn't want it, and it really screwed me up royally. I paid a huge price, and I've done decades of therapy to deal with it. And so that's how I want to wind up, because I'm already about 10 minutes into the video, but I want to wind up by telling people that if you're a victim of this and you're still in it, please tell somebody. Tell a school counselor, tell anybody, get some help. Don't keep it in, because it's only going to compound exponentially and get worse as you get older. So try to get some support. If you're an adult and you're looking back on your childhood the way I am, get some therapeutic help. You need to talk about this. You need to see how it's affected your views of sexual relationships, of relationships with others in general, friendship or otherwise, of your own body image, of yourself, how you deal with shame, how you deal with guilt. It affects a child in so many ways. And again, this is not talked about a lot. You hear a lot about sexual abuse because it's something obvious to see, or physical abuse. You can see where somebody's been bruised or they're cut or something, or there's different kinds of abuse that you can point out. But with emotional abuse, it's very insidious and hidden. And that's the way it was in my life, because it was hard for anybody else to believe that my mother, of all people, was harming me that way. But she did. She did a good job of it, and I paid a big price, but I've also worked very hard in overcoming it, and that's what led me to be a licensed therapist as I got older, because I wanted to work with all the depth of emotion I had in me about this and other things. If you're a parent doing this and you're watching this, stop it right now, okay? Back off. And with the sexuality, I will wind up on this point, and that's a very controversial point. And in my belief about myself personally, I think, yes, there's some genetic composition quite often to how somebody becomes gay or lesbian. And I am not debating that I may have been born with some of that DNA, which is fine with me. It's just that we also need to talk a little bit more about the environmental situation that leads to a child becoming homosexual because of in this case, emotional incest, which is smothering that child's identity. Therefore, they begin to identify with that parent. That's what I think I did. That's what happened to me. And in the identification with my mother, even though obviously I was a male child, but that sort of got ignored by her, that led me then to have attraction to the same sex, which I think contributed to me being gay. Now that, again, is something that is controversial, not talked about very much, but we need to talk about it. We need to explore it a little bit more than it's being explored. Pass this video around, share it, let people know what emotional incest really is. There's some books out there on it. We need to educate ourselves about emotional incest because it's much more prevalent than people realize. I'll leave it on a note of hope because there is so much hope for children who are victims of this, but you have to work hard at it. So please leave me some comments below. If you're a victim of emotional incest, I'd like to hear your story. Please subscribe to my mental health channel if you like these kind of YouTube videos. And until next week, this is Brad Shore signing off from Ask a Shrink.